Thank you, Harsh. Thank you, Madam Minister, for being with us this afternoon. I thought maybe just to get it started, I can just ask you, how was your visit and what are you taking away from this visit?
First of all, let me say hello. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to come to this conversation. It's my first time having an event with the ORF, and I was very sad not to be able to participate in Raisina. And when I talked about it with Samir, he said, well, we can think of this as a kickoff for Raisina. I said, okay, I'll have to settle for that this year, and next year, hopefully, I'll be able to make it to Raisina proper. That's the first point I wanted to thank you. The second thing is I spent 22 years as a law professor at the University of Toronto. I taught at Yale and Cambridge and Queen's, and all of that makes me appreciate even more the 40 young Raisina Fellows. So maybe we could give them a hand and really appreciate their presence.
Can you raise your hands, the young fellows?
Raise your hands if you're a Raisina Fellow. Amazing. Keep going. This is going to be a great learning experience, and you will continue to make great contributions in whatever field you ultimately choose with all of this work you're doing at this stage in your life. So let's get back to the question. How is the visit?
What are you taking back from India?
Well, so I have to go into the topic a little bit by setting up today's visit between Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Modi. We are in a geopolitical situation that calls for countries to ensure they're cooperating and coordinating along a variety of axes. Indeed, this was the gist of Prime Minister Carney's Davos speech, in which he said that the global trading order is completely rewired, and indeed the geopolitical environment has ruptured. There's some debate about whether it's been a rupture or a transformation, but suffice this to say that the global strategic environment is sufficiently different that Canada and a number of other countries are looking to diversify their trading relationships and align ourselves more closely with partners in a variety of areas. So this is the thinking that has driven Canadian foreign policy for the last year. And in particular, I and Prime Minister Carney have been working very hard to build those alliances, to ensure we're cooperating. And so you might say, well, what about the multilateral rules-based order? Well, the multilateral rules-based order is still very important. We're not throwing those alliances out the window. NATO, the United Nations, these fundamental organizations around which we do cooperate continue to be important, but now you are seeing additional alliances and relationships come to the fore because we must be pragmatists. Not only principled, adhering to the principles of international law and the rules-based order, like territorial integrity and state sovereignty. Those are fundamental principles. But Canada has signed at least 12 trade agreements in the last 6 months over 4 continents because we are also pragmatists. And that's what brings us to India. This pragmatism, this need to ensure that we are building the Canada-India relationship along a number of axes. And I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about the joint statement that the Prime Minister's issued today.
Madam Minister, can I ask you a slightly obvious question? How easy or how difficult was it to go from a relationship that was estranged over the last 2 or 3 years to this full embrace? You know, if you were to watch the prime ministers today or to watch you and your counterpart, it would seem that this was so natural and so normal, right? But how difficult was it to go from 0 to 100 in no time?
This is an excellent question because it has been a step-by-step approach in one in which when I came into the foreign affairs portfolio, I sat down with the Prime Minister and we charted out what that step-by-step approach would look like. It began with appointing high commissioners and including the staff of the Canadian High Commission who supported me while I'm here, and then moved to additional steps. I came in October and Minister Jaishankar and I issued a joint declaration. That was the initial foundation for the leaders' joint statement today. What did the joint statement say, or the declaration that we issued back in October? And I put that out there because at the heart of your question was, you know, what were some of the difficult
Correct.
aspects in the relationship? And certainly what we have to remember is the public safety and security element, the respect for the rule of law, the concerns that Canadians have relating to transnational repression and foreign interference have been significant. And so that continued to be a topic of our discussion, including a few paragraphs in our joint statement back in October. And then we said there's another track to the relationship. Not only are we going to focus on public safety and security issues, including through a dialogue at the most senior levels of our governments that will be ongoing, but we need to build the economic relationship also along several axes. Trade, and we have committed to completing a comprehensive economic partnership agreement.
By this year.
Yes, exactly. Energy, critical minerals, agriculture, artificial intelligence and technology, people-to-people ties. And I hope we can just pause there for a moment.
Okay.
We have 2 million Canadians of Indian origin or some association to the Indian subcontinent in Canada. These Canadians are very much the driver of a closer relationship between Canada and India along various axes: education, cultural ties, the arts and entertainment area, business-to-business ties. And so both Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Modi stressed the importance of people-to-people ties. You might have heard that in their remarks that were public this afternoon.
No, I heard 3 words. I heard energy, I heard technology, and I heard people, talent. I think the word used was talent, right? So the question is that there is this actually bottomless Indian hunger to acquire degrees and education and knowledge and skills. And the question for you is that with some parts of the world closing their doors to those who are seeking such opportunities, do you think there's an opportunity here for Canada to be able to attract perhaps the finest minds from India and other parts of the world?
Well, there are already 400,000 Indian students in Canada, which is almost 500,000 students who have shown an interest in Canadian educational institutions. So we're not starting from ground zero, but the gist of the conversation was, can it be reciprocal? Can Canadian universities find
Campuses here.
or some sort of educational input in India so that it becomes more reciprocal, more two-way? And so in Mumbai, where we were, 4 Canadian university presidents joined me to initiate a new strategic partnership with universities and the Government of Canada, Dalhousie, University of Toronto, McGill, and the University of British Columbia. This is following on from 20 university presidents coming just 2 weeks ago. This is all to say that there is a hunger in the educational sector for greater interaction. And so when you say talent, it's not only at the university and polytechnic and college level, but that's the pipeline that will feed the technology sector, the health sector, critical minerals, and growth economically in all those areas.
There was a lot of focus on resources, and nuclear was obviously one of the sectors that was focused on, but also critical minerals and, of course, other commodities. How is that going to play out in the next 3 to 5 years in your assessment? What are the next 3 to 5 years?
Another great question. Amazing. So the company called Cameco has been negotiating a uranium agreement with the government of India over the last few years. And today it was announced that India will purchase $2.6 billion worth of civil use uranium for its nuclear sector here. That is an example of the breadth of the Canadian competitive advantage in the area of critical minerals. Second point I'll make is at the G7, the leaders agreed to a buyer's club for critical minerals to ensure that countries can actually have more stability in the critical mineral supply chain. You'll remember that Prime Minister Modi was invited to Kananaskis, Alberta in June of last year and very much supported the work that the G7 countries were doing in the area of critical minerals. So in the joint statement, you do see greater intention to cooperate in terms of critical minerals. And Canada has a wealth of natural resources, including in the area of energy. We're an energy superpower and a critical minerals powerhouse.
The technology sector. Again, I think it's one of the sectors that the world, or maybe many in India, do not truly appreciate the Canadian sophistication. From Waterloo to other places, there is a whole ecosystem in Canada that could really be complementary to India's own technology aspirations. So India-Canada tech bridge, or creating this pipeline of innovation that flows both ways, is that something?
Well, exactly. There's a clear recognition in the results of the Leaders Summit, if you will, that technology and innovation are central drivers of economic growth. And we know this, India just hosted the AI Summit. And Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Carney both have strong interest in cooperating along these axes. And they discuss the urgency and the mutual benefit of strategic partnership, not only on AI and technology, but also in space, space cooperation, not just in the public, but also in the private sector. So there's ambitious implementation under execution to operationalize joint projects in these areas. This is super exciting, and we can't forget digital and AI cooperation and the MOU that the leaders of India, Australia, and Canada signed at the G20. We call it the ACITI. That's the cooperation agreement on innovation and technology, and you're going to see a lot more coming out on that as well.
I really want to double down on this particular, interesting development, which is the plurilateral, the India, Australia, Canada trilateral. Let me just ask you as a hypothetical question. Our foreign minister has spoken about a G-2 world, that there is a world where the rest of the world has to talk amongst itself and come up with solutions, frameworks, and of course take responsibility as well. We've had Prime Minister Carney speak about the same in a different way at Davos, where he actually mentioned about the others having to take responsibility in building some of the frameworks for the future. In that sense, do you think there is merit in creating this new minilateral engagement amongst the rest of the world? And do you think there's a role for, say, something like a Commonwealth in a new avatar, without the baggage of what is common, and more about the wealth creation and value creation that we can do as countries together?
So I'm so glad you brought this back to the Prime Minister's speech at Davos, which I'm now referring to as the Carney Doctrine. And the Carney Doctrine essentially says that pragmatism requires us to identify particular areas, sectors, where cooperation will yield benefits not simply multilaterally, but for our domestic economies, respectively. And so is the case with the ACITI, with India, Canada, and Australia. On the sidelines of the G20, Prime Minister Modi, Albanese, and Carney sat together with a piece of paper and a pen and marked up a document that they could all agree on. This is a different type of diplomacy. This is pragmatic diplomacy. What do our countries need? How can we as leaders bring those needs to the fore and reflect them on a piece of paper? And so when I say you're going to see more of that type of activity amongst leaders, that is the Carney Doctrine in action. And it responds pragmatically to the world in which we're living. Alexander Stubb calls it values-based realism. So does Prime Minister Carney in his Davos speech, refers to it in that way. In fact, I was coming out of the Davos speech and I saw President Stubb walk kind of this way, and I said hi, and he just looked at me and he goes, values-based realism. And I just kept walking and he kept walking. And so all that to say, this is a new type of foreign policy. And this isn't just Canada. It's not just India. At the Munich Security Conference 2 weeks ago, in every room, people were discussing the Carney Doctrine. How does it apply to our country? How are we going to cooperate and coordinate together, the non-hegemonic powers, if you will, to effect change? The last thing I'll say on this question is, what does it mean for Canada, apart from the ICITI? Look at what we're doing with Arctic security. We are partnering with the Nordic Five to ensure that we're not just looking at Arctic security from a domestic standpoint or even a North American standpoint. The Arctic is vast. There are several countries that have a direct territorial interest in Arctic security, and we are working with Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and Iceland, as well as in our own backyard, to make sure that we are cooperative on an issue of urgent priority. That's why I went to Greenland recently and opened up the Canadian consulate there.
You know, I was just thinking, and you don't have to respond to this, but I was just thinking that if you were to add Japan to India, Australia, Canada, you would have a new Quad. So, I mean, that's not a question. I'm just saying that there's something to think about building, perhaps even New Zealand. You know, you could think about countries that could join that group and look at innovation in a new way in the future.
So the Prime Minister is leaving Delhi this evening and heading to Australia and then Japan. I was in Japan. I have a strategy. I try to get to where I think the Prime Minister is going to go before he goes, so that I can lay the groundwork for a potential visit by him. It's just a strategy that I try to employ as foreign minister. And I was in Japan last summer, and I was in India in October. So this is just...
So before I open it up and bring in some of our young minds here to speak to you, you did mention the importance of a UN-based system, the multilateral order, and in that sense, how do you see countries such as Canada and India and Australia and Japan and others play a role to tide over the times when maybe the big two are not interested in preserving that order? What is our role in that moment when it is us who's going to be at the receiving end of a system that goes bad?
So the Carney Doctrine is an attempt to recognize some of the eventualities that you're describing in your question. And I think countries are gravitating towards Prime Minister Carney's words because they realize the potentiality of non-cooperation, the potential downfalls of countries retreating. And so when Prime Minister Carney says, you know, take the sign down from the window following the analogy from Václav Havel, he's really saying, let's call a spade, realize that pragmatism is necessary as the global economic order realigns, and then work together as non-hegemonic powers. One of the issues, though, that no doubt exists is within countries that don't see themselves as middle powers and want to occupy a different space than the middle powers themselves. And I would say to that pragmatism will rule the day. At the end of the day, we need to leverage our competitive advantages and we need to cooperate where we can.
That's an important point because many in India may not visualize themselves as being middle powers. They might see themselves as powers in transition, moving from a certain state to a different state. And I think middle powers may be a...
So, and it's middle powers is somewhat of an outdated term, if you will. I like to refer to like-minded countries, especially when we talk about pragmatism, because you're going to be addressing these issues on a case-by-case basis, pragmatically. And so when you do that, you're dealing with a like-minded
So we are
country.
responsive powers. I think that was another term that the Carney doctrine used, responsive powers.
Exactly.
And I think that's something we can work
And
with.
responsible.
And responsible powers. I have an idea. Since you are planning a FTA by the end of the year, do you think we can do a Raisina in Canada end of the year and maybe celebrate the FTA?
Well, if I could just, a slight clarification before I respond. We made a distinct decision that this would be a comprehensive economic partnership agreement as opposed to an FTA. So to accomplish the CEPA in now less than a year is ambitious. But both leaders are ambitious, as you know, and we have already appointed the trade negotiator. In terms of your question, come to Canada. We would love to have you there, and I would love to participate in a Raisina element should you decide to go that route.
Wonderful. We are getting there. The competition is CEPA comes first or Raisina comes first. I think that's the race now. But let me turn to some of the folks who have expressed interest to pose questions to you. Let me go to Anutama Banerjee. Yeah, there you are. Can we get the mic to her, please?
So you spoke at length about critical minerals and you said that the economic relationship is moving along several arcs and critical minerals being one of them. And you did point out a few things there. But when it comes to specifics, what is it that India and Canada could potentially do there? I just had that question.
Besides nuclear. I think you explained the nuclear part.
Yes. Thank you.
So we have a critical mineral strategy that we've had in place for a number of years now. Given the depth and variation of critical minerals, copper, nickel, iron, the uranium I mentioned, and the list goes on. Lithium is another one, and germanium. And I'll just say that Canada's vastness territorially has meant that we have a deep wealth in critical minerals in the ground. And we are constantly speaking with countries about potential offtake agreements on any one of these critical minerals. And so the Buyers Club idea is essentially a production alliance so that countries can work together on stabilizing the supply chain for the production of critical minerals. And we actually signed 25 agreements for critical minerals as a result of this Buyers Club in the fall of 2025 under Minister Tim Hodgson, who was actually in India discussing critical minerals with his counterpart just 2 weeks ago. So we're going to begin a critical minerals dialogue with India, and you can see there is competitive advantage here for Canada in this area. And again, any number of countries I speak with want to have this conversation with Canada.
Can I turn to Jyotsna Mehra? There you are. Can I bring a mic there? Thank you.
Minister, congratulations on the successful visit. You spoke about like-minded partners talking to each other and advancing pragmatic diplomacy. From our lens, Delhi is simultaneously deepening partnerships with powers such as Australia, France, Japan, EU, across defense, energy, tech. And given that it is an increasingly crowded field, where do you think Canada's distinct role lie?
Did you discuss defense at all? Defense and security as a strategic in
yes, yes, there's also going to be a defense dialogue that begins. And indeed, that stretches back to our Indo-Pacific strategy, where we contemplated naval engagements and visits to the port of India, ports in India.
So we have a Lieutenant General coming down from Canada for the Raisina dialogue.
Who's that?
I think he's the chief representative of your chief of defense staff.
Okay.
So
Jenny Carney.
That's right. He's
That's
coming
her
down.
name. But the CDS is Jenny. So
No,
anyway,
I'm talking about her
her
representative.
representative. Okay. Anyway, back to the question, which was about like-minded countries, and in particular, what's
Her question was, it is a crowded field. What
Crowded
does
field.
Canada bring that is unique, different to the table?
right. So the Prime Minister will continually say, and it's accurate, that we are an energy superpower. And let me just dig a little deeper on energy. LNG is extremely hot. People, countries all over the world are looking to purchase more LNG. Canada is one of the key producers and shippers of LNG, in fact, and the first shipment of LNG left Canada's West Port in Vancouver in June 2025. As we move into this world of like-mindeds cooperating, we are seeing countries ask Canada for the purchase of our LNG. That's just one example. We are also, when you talk about energy superpower, we're also have expertise in clean and conventional energy. And so whether we are talking about wind power or solar power or even SMRs, we can have that conversation about clean and conventional. The government of Canada built a pipeline from Alberta to Canada's west coast. It costed, over $30 billion, but oil is flowing to Canada's west coast. In terms of nuclear, we are developing the first small modular reactor in Darlington, Ontario. We've just designated that as a national project for Canada. So any number of countries I talk to want to talk SMRs and they want to talk LNG.
No, I think the point is well made. Energy and resources superpower, and I think we need more of Canada in our lives. Now, let me turn to Mustafa. Where is Mustafa? Can I see? Oh, there you are. There's the mic.
Good evening, Her Excellency. So my question is basically like you're saying, the Canada has signed a lot of trade deals recently. It has signed a strategic partnership with China. So what role does it play in, what implications does it have basically with with Canada's relationship with India? How does it affect it basically? That's what I'm asking.
Okay, I think I should just clarify. There is a misconception that we signed an FTA or a trade agreement with China. We did not. Our trip to China was resulted in the resolution of certain trade frictions with China. And in particular, an agreement relating to the tariffs that were placed on Canadian agricultural products like canola and seafood products and certain meats. So this is, it was a very much limited in scope. But I take the point that we are engaging with China in a way that we had not in the past. And again, I take us back to this idea that in this world of economic stress, we will be pragmatic. We will address issues of economic concern to our country by engaging. And the key point is that diplomacy is not about hiding under a rock and thinking that your concerns internationally are going to magically disappear. Diplomacy requires us to sit at the table and to have difficult conversations in some cases and search for a path forward. And that's exactly what we're doing on China and India and any number of other countries.
Let me turn to Varun. Is Varun here? Oh, there you are.
Good evening, ma'am. So you mentioned Carney doctrine, and which is primarily driven by pragmatism, we might know. So in the context of transatlantic uncertainties and the shifting US global priorities, does Canada see European Union as a more stable and more resilient partner alongside the US, and how this might change
European Union.
How this might change the future Canadian political and security strategy? Thank you.
I mean, the US-Europe dynamic is interesting. Where is Canada in that dynamic?
You know, Canada is often referred to as the most European of non-European partners. Because the values and international partnerships that we have thrived under often involve European countries. And this has led to tangible results recently. We were the only non-European country to sign on to the SAFE agreement. That's the Defense Industrial Initiative of the EU. The only non-European country admitted was Canada. That means that our defense suppliers can participate in procurements in Europe on the same terms as European businesses. This is amazing for the Canadian defense industry. We're putting $80 billion into defense and security we committed in the last federal budget to $80 billion. Part of that is going to build up our defense sector and dual use infrastructure, et cetera. But how do you build a defense sector? You need contracts for them to participate in. Now, we're not going to be able to produce all the contracts to ensure this sector thrives, but we certainly did well diplomatically to ensure that Canada could participate in the SAFE. So from an EU perspective, you will continue to see initiatives like that. Of course, we have the CETA with the EU, and that's really, really important. The free trade agreement between the EU and Canada. We're moving on a number of fronts to increase our work with the EU.
Let me take the final question this evening. Let me go to Agrima Kanwar.
Good evening, ma'am. Thank you so much for taking out the time and for your lovely insights. How is Canada adapting the Indo-Pacific strategy amid evolving US foreign policy trajectories? And what does this reveal about Ottawa's approach to middle power diplomacy, alliance management, and strategic autonomy in an era of intensified geopolitical competition?
So thank you for that question. We have this Indo-Pacific strategy. I was a Minister of National Defense when we issued it in late 2022. And we are a Pacific country ourselves, and it made good sense to have an Indo-Pacific strategy which focused on increased diplomacy and military engagement and people-to-people ties through more passport offices and those types of initiatives. And now we are in this world where economic diplomacy, if you will, is part and a significant part of our foreign policy. So we are going to be issuing a new national security strategy. And then after that, we will have a new foreign policy strategy that is going to be developed, taking into account some of the key pillars of Indo-Pacific engagement. But make no mistake, The Indo-Pacific region is the region for us to grow economically, and we are going to continue to push on several fronts, including, fingers crossed, concluding an FTA with ASEAN in 2026.
And the CEPA with India soon thereafter, or maybe before.
Exactly.
Final question to you, Minister. Lots of conversations on energy and resources. In our country, there's a lot of emphasis on climate action and mitigation and sustainable development. Prime Minister Carney was, as a central banker and then as in his other roles, very cognizant of the opportunity that green transitions and energy transitions offer us. That clearly has to be one of the cornerstones of our relationship for the future, right?
Exactly. And today, the prime ministers both welcomed the signing of a memorandum of understanding on clean energy cooperation. Mm-hmm. It is without question an area where we, Canada and India, want to work together. And this MOU is going to establish a comprehensive institutional framework to advance bilateral cooperation on solar, on wind, on bioenergy, on small hydro, on energy storage, and on capacity building. So you're exactly right. This is an area that both countries want to push on. We both have something to bring to the table, and we want to accelerate the energy transition through information exchange and through joint investment opportunities. So it's win-win.
Madam Minister, you've given us a lot of your time this evening. I know there's a hard stop at 6, but before you leave, and to establish that we are really serious about this being the first of our ICENA conversations that will take place, I want to present to you a collection of coins, the challenge coins over 10 years, because ICENA is now 10 years old. But I also want to I want you to be the first person to have the challenge coin for the 2026 edition. So I'm going to give you the first challenge coin for ICENA 2026 to establish that this is the curtain raiser for that conversation. And of course, we want to come to Canada and make Canada our home as ICENA.
Well, I can't wait to welcome you to Canada. And I'm so honored to be able to have the first challenge coin of 2026.
Can I request Tanvi to join me?
Thank you. That's so nice. Thank you.